Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I wanted to go over some more value trade options for the Toronto Maple Leafs at this year's trade deadline. We've done a number of videos to this point talking about some of the flashier names that should be available at this year's trade deadline. Guys like Patrick Kane and Jacob Chychrun, Timo Meier, Jake McCabe, Ryan O'Reilly. But we haven't done a video looking at some value adds or guys that should just be less expensive. And because these guys aren't the flashiest of names, I need you guys to temper your expectations a little bit, and I need you to hear me out. You know, these aren't necessarily guys who I want the Maple Leafs to trade for. These are just guys who should be available at this year's deadline, who I found a bit interesting, that shouldn't break the bank. So the first name on this list is from Frank Saravalli's latest trade bait article, and that's Vancouver Canucks forward Connor Garland. Connor Garland is a smaller 26-year-old winger that plays with tenacity at both ends of the ice. He's a creative playmaker, and he's got a bit of an okay shot as well, but the main thing that stands out about him is his motor and his work ethic. He just works really hard when he's out there. He's got a 20-goal season already under his belt, and he had 19 just last year with 52 points. And the interesting thing about him is that, according to Rick Dhaliwal, who reports a lot on the Vancouver Canucks, he could be somebody that the Canucks look to buy out this summer. Connor Garland's contract is a shade under $5 million for the next 3 seasons after this one. So if we're looking at what it would cost Vancouver to buy him out, it would be just over $800,000 for the first 2 years, but then over $1.8 million for 4 more years afterwards. If the Canucks really want to get rid of Garland, I think it makes a lot more sense for them to just retain maybe $1.5 million over the next 3 years, rather than buying him out and having that dead cap hit for the next 6. Now, it's tough to evaluate players who play on teams that are as bad as Vancouver has been this year. But if we're looking at his Andy and Rono player card, he has been a good defensive player for the Canucks in an elevated role so far this year. And if we're looking at his player card from the previous season, when the Canucks were still kind of bad, but not as bad, I guess you can see that he was still producing good defensive results, but also the offensive numbers were there. If we're looking at how the Canucks have performed both offensively and defensively, with and without him in the lineup so far this year, they've been about the same team offensively, but defensively, they've been a much better team, and that's with him having played the 5th most amount of ice time up against the other team's best players this year, and getting a lot more shifts in the defensive zone. For whatever reason, the Vancouver Canucks just don't like this player, and I don't understand why. And if you were able to get him at $1.5 million retained for the next 3 seasons, that would put his cap hit at about $3.5 million. And Alex Kerfoot makes that much, and he's a UFA this summer. So not only does that give you an upgrade on what you have this year, but it also creates some cost certainty moving into the future. When Connor Garland was traded from the Coyotes to the Canucks well over a year ago, we did a video talking about the Maple Leafs potentially acquiring him then, because according to David Pagnotta, or the Fourth Period on Twitter, the Maple Leafs were one of the teams that checked in on him at the time, but instead of selling him off in his own individual trade, the Coyotes opted to attach him with Oliver Ekman-Larsson to get out from under that contract. And Kyle Dubas was recently in Vancouver checking out a couple of games, and that's not too much of a shocking revelation. You know, NHL general manager goes and watches another team play hockey. That's sort of just his job. But I wonder if Connor Garland was one of the guys that he was watching when he was at that game. We mentioned this a couple of videos ago, but looking over the number of guys that the Maple Leafs have in their organization available to them who can play the center ice position, they look a little bit thin. And if we look at the face-off numbers from this season, face-offs aren't the be-all, end-all, but when you're only winning 42 and 43% of them, like Pontus Holmberg and Kerfoot have this season, you can't have those guys taking draws regularly, and so far, they have been. Which is why a guy like Sam Lafferty from the Chicago Blackhawks could be an interesting add for this team. He's up over 50% on the draw so far this year, which would be a big improvement from the 42 or 43% that they were getting from Holmberg and Kerfoot, but also he's currently second in the NHL in shorthanded goals for with 3, and that's mostly because he's an excellent skater. The Maple Leafs had the 8th best penalty kill in the NHL last year, and they did that by not only being able to defend well in their own zone, but by being super aggressive and leading the league with 13 shorthanded goals. And with the departure of Ilya Mikheyev this past offseason, who was a large part of the reason why they were able to generate so much offense on their penalty kill, the Maple Leafs penalty kill is ranked 16th in the NHL so far this year. It just hasn't had that same punch or that same ability to defend well in their own zone and take it to opposing teams. In terms of being a fourth line center, he's an effective player at 5-on-5. He helps you win more draws, and he also adds an element to your penalty kill that maybe they were missing a bit with the departure of Mikheyev. But according to Frank Seravalli here, he's expected to be a bit of a hot commodity at this year's deadline because he does have one more year left on his deal at just $1.15 million. And I'm not really interested in spending another second round pick on just a fourth line center. The Maple Leafs have done that enough in recent memory with guys like Brian Boyle and Thomas Plekanec. So then what about a guy like Noel Acciari, who's got 10 goals and 18 points this year for the St. Louis Blues? He's a pending UFA at the end of this season at just $1.25 million, so he should be a bit cheaper than Sam Lafferty, and the way that Frank Seravalli describes him here makes him a perfect fit for this video as a guy who isn't a big, flashy name. He's a former 20-goal scorer who's been on pace for between 10 and 15 goals multiple times throughout his career, and he's winning faceoffs at a clip of just over 54% so far this year. And in heavy defensive zone minutes for the St. Louis Blues so far this year, he's been a good defender who has also been pretty good on the penalty kill as well. The last player that I wanted to talk about is San Jose Sharks forward Kevin Labanc, who was recently made a healthy scratch. The 27-year-old forward has just one more year left on his contract at $4.725 million per season. This year so far, he's got 10 goals and 25 points in 45 games. If the San Jose Sharks, who are seemingly in just sell everything mode, were willing to retain a little bit on that contract, I think he could be a very, very useful player. Labanc is a player who profiles as a player who's better without the puck than with it. And what I mean by that is he's able to be defensively responsible away from it. And if you play him with guys who could do the heavy lifting and carry the puck into the offensive zone and find him, he's able to make things happen. His most common line mates so far this season have been Timo Meier and Tomas Hertl. So if he's able to be a very effective third member of a line, that's really all the Maple Leafs would need him to be if he were to play with Austin Matthews and William Nylander, or John Tavares and Mitch Marner. He may not be as flashy of a name as his line mate and teammate Timo Meier is, who plays that kind of complete power forward game that you would really want on the Maple Leafs, but because he is signed through next year, if they are able to get some salary retention on him, he's a nice piece that shouldn't break the bank. Or should I say break the bank? Wow, I think that means it's time to wrap up the video here. But in all seriousness, these are value names. They aren't as flashy. They shouldn't cost as much as some of those top-end guys, but they're still effective players that would fill a role on the Maple Leafs, or at least a hole on their roster right now. The point in acquiring a more value add in somebody like Kevin Labanc or even Connor Garland is that it would leave room asset-wise and maybe even salary cap-wise to go out and address another need on this team. Like we've mentioned in this video and a previous video as well, there does seem to be a need for some more center depth on this team. Somebody who could win faceoffs at a better rate than the guys who they already have and can chip in a little bit 5-on-5 and maybe on their penalty kill as well. Like we said earlier in the video, these were just guys who I found interesting that shouldn't end up costing you a whole ton. And when considering who to acquire at this year's trade deadline, if you're not considering the cost to acquire those players, I think you're doing it wrong. Because if you want to go out and acquire the big name and put all your eggs in one basket, that's fine. But there is a legitimate debate between doing that and then maybe getting a value option that allows you to fill out a couple of more holes on your roster as well. So make sure to let me know what your guys' thoughts and opinions are down in the comment section below. And make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. And guys, I promise more content is going to be coming over the next month or so. I should have a lot more time to dedicate towards the channel and these videos because my schedule's freed up a lot. So I'll be seeing you guys a lot more. Take care.